Hi, and welcome to Ask Me Anything Hours. My name is Dan Merrick. I'm the Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development here at Rouxbe. And during this time is when we take the time out during the week to answer any of your questions culinary related. A little housekeeping ahead of time. You can ask us any kind of questions that you'd like to on the top right-hand corner just by clicking inside that box, typing in your question, and hitting add. Our moderator, Patrick, will review it to make sure that it works for us and it's going to the right place, and then it'll go into our queue on the right-hand side. If there is a question in that queue that you see on the side that you'd like to be answered quicker, you can always hit the heart icon and it'll move it further up onto the list. So again, my name's Dan Merrick. I have been a plant-based chef for wow, almost 15, maybe 18 years. So we usually try to keep these pretty plant-based and plant-based related. But we're going to dive right in. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll get them answered as soon as possible. So we're going to start off with Dion's question about convection baking. So this is actually an interesting question. It's on a Viking gas stove, has convection roast, true convection, convection bake, and bake. What's the difference between true convection and convection roast? This is a great question, and this is actually something that's come up a little more recently as they've been adding them. And I did actually post a link here too, so you can actually go into that to get a little bit more detail. But more recently on ovens, you'll find a variety of these different kind of convections. So an American convection oven typically works where there's a heating element on the bottom of your oven, and then there's a fan in the back of your oven, and that fan basically starts to rotate the air around inside of your oven, and it does it kind of at a medium pace basically. And what that's basically doing is, if you have a cold object in the a baking tray or something like that, that's actually cooling the air around the item itself. So if you're rotating the air around that, it's actually helping to heat it up quicker. Now that's an American style convection, and that's kind of what has been, the standard in ovens in America for quite some time. Now, if you look at like air fryers, it's kind of like a step up. It actually blows the air really, really fast on the inside of those little air fryers to be able to move the air around quickly on that, and this using the same heating element. Now, a true convection is something that's actually more used in Europe, but it's actually started to find its way into the states. And on those functions, it's actually a little bit of a slower rotation of the air on the inside, but it is using the heating element that's on the bottom of the oven, but also the heating elements at the top of the oven, which is typically used for doing a broil function, so the heat coming down from the top. So you're still getting both functions of heat on the top and the bottom of it, but the true convection is actually moving the air between those two elements as well, but you're using both of the heating elements instead of just one of them. So the difference basically between true convection and convection roast is a different thing, because convection roast is a function that actually moves it slower, but it also help kind of use it on meats a lot more, I guess, where you can actually get a kind of a harder outside, and keep the inside a little bit softer as well. So a lot of different convections out there. Unfortunately, there isn't like a standard like this is always the way it is, but generally that is kind of the different versions of them: the convection, true convection, convection bake, and then the regular bake is just having the heating element from the bottom. So a couple different ways to be able to use those. Some recipes will call for them, but not many do, because not everybody has a true convection, versus convection. Just remember that when you are using those convection functions with the air circulating like that, that your whatever you're cooking will typically cook a little faster than it would on just your normal baking process, because it is actually moving that air and keeping it hot quicker as well. So if you want more detail on that, there's about 6 pages of notes on that on the link that I put on this through Simply Recipes. It's actually a great little article on the topic, and I'm sure you'll learn something from it. So great question, DM, and I hope that helped out. Our next question here is from Janet. Chef Dan, is the liquid from any can of beans considered aquafaba? How long can the liquid be kept refrigerated? Thank you. So, aquafaba is typically the protein-rich liquid that's um, it basically comes from cooking chickpeas. Is usually what we use aquafaba from. Now, you can get that same kind of protein liquid from other kinds of beans, but traditionally you're getting it from a chickpea. Now that might be because they're also it's a clearer liquid, so you could have it from the white bean as well. But when we're talking about aquafaba, we're usually talking about the can using it from chickpeas. Now it doesn't always have to be canned, so you can get the aquafaba just from cooking the beans in that liquid as well, and it works quite well as well in different applications, from using it for thickeners, for doing meringues, different things like that as well too. But I don't know if you'd actually call it aquafaba if it was from something like a black bean. I've never used, the liquid from like a black bean or something like that in the same way I would use an aquafaba traditionally. I use it for other things, but usually it's just for the flavoring of something, But aquafaba typically I know comes from the chickpea. And how long can the liquid be kept refrigerated? So typically after opening the can, you can keep it for about 4 to 5 days afterward, as long as it's in the refrigerator in a sealed container. Just make sure it's not open in the fridge as well too, and it will last 4 to 5 days in the fridge just like that. So typically, if I'm going to be opening a can of chickpeas, I will usually pour out the aquafaba into a container and put it in my fridge, just to be able to hold on to it in case I do need it. Because every so often, when you do need aquafaba, sometimes you don't know that you're going to need it until you do. So it's always good to have a little bit of it inside instead of just dumping it down the drain. So hope that helps, Janet. Michael S. Will there ever be a continuation, maybe a more advanced, with many, many different breads from all over the world course in the Baking Breads Arts course? So we do have a variety of different, bread courses, including some that were built by the French Pastry School, which are fantastic courses. So we do have a variety of different courses like that, with a whole huge variety of different kinds of breads. So I would definitely, have you take a look at those, Michael. Those are some great courses. There's 3 different ones off of that, besides just the one that the Rouxbe offering as well. But we are always developing new courses for Rouxbe, and I I know we don't have one under a new bread course under development this very second, but that doesn't mean that we won't have one come up very soon. A lot of that is from customer demand, what everybody's kind of looking for on those. So the more people that are asking for more bread courses, the more likely we are to do something like that. So just meeting that demand where it is. Um, if you have taken all the other courses that we have through bread as well, I know that our Facebook community is unbelievable for those courses as well. It's a great sharing community and a great place to learn as well, so that we can kind of interact with other people that have gone through the same things, and might learn a couple things off of that as well. But so at the moment there isn't a course under development, but that's not to say that there won't be in the near future. I just don't know of one that we're working on at the moment. And typically, since I'm one of the people that builds those, I would know about it. So, again, more demand for it, the more likely we are to make another course like that. All right, Kathy, I would love to see a vegan bread course. Is that a possibility? So, very much in the same vein of that. Um, we do have a variety of different courses on breads, but they are not vegan specific. So, you know, and that's really kind of on demand at the moment. That's something that we might have, because we don't have anything specifically just vegan bread as a course. That might be something as a possibility we do. Um, sooner than later because of the other we have so many other bread courses. If we're looking to kind of fill a segment that we don't have, that might be something. We don't have something in production at the moment, but it definitely is a possibility. So just keep tuned in and we'll see how that goes with those. So hope that answers that. Renee, can I use another type of mushroom if I can't find cremini? Yes, you absolutely can. Depending on the recipe, creminis are very easily substituted out. So you can use a white button mushroom, you can use a baby bella, instead of the cremini as well. The flavor profiles are very similar, but they act the same way when you're cooking them, typically in the same way as well. So if you can't find a cremini mushroom, that's totally okay. Using a white button, the baby bellas, some of those other ones that are a little easier to find at a traditional grocery store. That's totally fine. You can substitute those ones out as well. I also, highly encourage you to try different kinds of mushrooms. As you're at the store and you see a mushroom you've not tried before, try mixing it up a little bit. There's so many different kinds of mushrooms. There's so many great, benefits that you can get and out of mushrooms and vitamins out of mushrooms. I try to, include them very regularly in my meals, and I encourage you to do the same. All right. Our next question, I'm going to mispronounce this, so I'm just going to let it be at that. But Chef Dan, can we use the liquid as aquafaba, which is soaked in the chickpeas or any beans or lentil for 1 to 2 days prior to making breads or cakes? Let's see. I'll read that again. It's aquafaba, which is so. Can you use the liquid for 1 to 2 days after making the breads or the cakes? I'm guessing if you're using aquafaba and you're making a bread, can you use it to 1 to 2 days later? Yes, you can. So the same thing if you refrigerate it, it should last, from 4 to 5 days in the fridge and still keep the protein rich. You want to definitely stir it up after you've stored it like that. But keeping in the refrigerator in a sealed container, just make sure to give it a good whisk before you're using it again, and it'll work just fine. 1 to 2 days later after making some of those for breads or cakes, or anything you're actually going to use the aquafaba for. All right, so Renee, can you reuse the vegetables you used in the basic vegetable stocks? It seems to waste to throw them out. We get this question quite regularly, Renee, and the answer always is yeah, you can use them, but really by the time you're done making the stock, you've actually taken out most of the essential vitamins and nutrients out of those, and those vitamins and nutrients and flavor are now in the stock. So you can use them. In fact, I see a lot of students in very inventive ways of trying to reuse them, from just blending them up in the soup, which is fine. You're going to get the fiber out of those, which is totally as well too, totally okay to be able to do as well. But generally, I'm going to take them out because they've served their usefulness. I usually compost them to be able to turn them back into soil. Basically, is the thing that I usually do with the vegetables in the stock afterwards. So instead of throwing them out, try composting them. A much better way to be able to use those. But if you want to be able to add a little bit of texture into things, you can absolutely add them into them. But remember, they've been cooked so long that they're going to be really mushy. So you're not going to get a lot of texture. The flavor has been pretty much taken out of them or blended with all the other things in there. So I would recommend, using them for compost. But again, feel free to be able to do whatever you'd like with them. I see a lot of students trying to think of inventive ways to be able to use them, and they're cooking either as filler into things. You can put them into different dishes, like maybe a shepherd's pie or something like that if you'd like to. But just remember that the flavor profiles changed a little bit from the way that they were originally put into it, and there's not going to be a lot of vitamins or nutrients left in them because you're putting them in the stock, which is the intention of doing that. Great question, Renee. Right, Vicky, do tower gardens produce the same quality of nutrients as one grown in dirt or found in stores? Yes, actually, they do. I used to work for a foundation that gave away tower gardens called Whole Kids Foundation, and we gave gardens to schools. It was a great foundation, still is in existence today. It's under an arm of Whole Foods Market, and tower gardens are wonderful because you can grow them indoor and under lights, if you're in the winter, if they're not near a sun source. But um, you can grow them inside and get wonderful, wonderful produce off of them. That is a great way to be able to show kids how to grow vegetables, but also just a great source to be able to get different varieties of plants even off season, just by growing them in the tower garden versus outside. Now typically tower gardens are using kind of it's like a plug that kind of goes into it. Some of them have like a nutrient soil kind of thing that goes with them, but typically the water that is circulating through the towers has nutrients that have been added to those, and those nutrients are what the plants are. They're getting the water, they're getting those nutrients to be able to pull in there as well. So you'll see that most tower gardens will come with a certain type of nutrient additive that they like to be able to put in with those plants. Now, different ones have different proprietary blends, but the more you research tower gardens and maintenance and ways to be able to keep your plants going, you'll find that everybody has their own kind of unique take on that, but they absolutely incorporate nutrients into those. So you will get the same amount of nutrients and you'll get the same amount of vitamins as one that you would find in a store. And you'll get a little bit cleaner flavor than you would in the ground sometimes, because the ground can sometimes affect other things. So um, that's one of the great things about planting in the garden, in the soil. But also, if you're looking for a consistent plant in the tower garden, that's a great way to be able to do that. So hope that helps, Vicky. Fran, wonderful to see you here. I had a student in essential vegan desserts use a black bean aquafaba, great bean water, to color her meringues purple. It had more flavor. Not recommended. Aquafaba can be frozen too. Good point, Fran. So, Fran, developed the essential vegan desserts for Ruby. She's a fantastic chef and friend, and just great advice from this as well. So the black bean aquafaba, which is great, the bean water, again, protein rich, being able to have the colorization of that, which is great to make it purple. How fun. And I that's a great point, that aquafaba can be frozen. So it's a great thing to be able to do. You can also throw it in the freezer. So if you're not going to use it right away, put it in the freezer, seal it on up. You can use it for later. Great to see you, Fran. Hope you're doing well. All right, Janet. Chef, should you add baking soda while you soak your beans? Thank you. I've heard this before, and I'm not a big fan of adding baking soda while you soak your beans. I think just water is fine when you're soaking them. I typically, for any bean, I'm just going to soak them overnight to be able to do that. They say that baking soda can actually, give them a little more tenderization, will get rid of some of the gases. I don't really think that you need to put that step in there. One of the biggest things I do find when people are using baking soda, they're using too much, which is not good for actually doing that. So I typically just use water, and that works just fine. People have been making beans for thousands and thousands of years. Baking soda is not something that they essentially put into it. I think the water method works just fine. So yes, you can just don't put too much in, but water works actually just fine in the same way. Terry, is there a way to make sauerkraut without using salt? Yes, there is. You can also, there's a different fermentation method that you can do to be able to make the fermentation happen for the sauerkraut as well without using salt. Um, you know, but I'm not going to go into it too much right here. But if you do a little bit of research on that, you can find that you can do fermentations without using salt as well. Traditionally, you're going to use like and uh, a water and salt brine to be able to make that happen. But there are alternative ways to be able to make that happen. Sally, Chef Dan, do you have any tips on pickling or fermenting food? Anyone in particular that you like to make? I love to pickle and ferment foods. Some of the ones I put into our plant-based pro course that I love to do a fermented sriracha, which I usually take Fresno peppers, and I do kind of an Asian, style one. So I do ginger, Fresno peppers, and garlic, blend those all up, and then let them sit for about 7 days, stirring once a day, and then adding vinegar to those. And it's a fantastic sriracha um, that has just a slightly different flavor. And you can go more traditional and just do the garlic with no ginger if you want more kind of the, the rooster style kind of sriracha, if you'd like that to have the garlic sriracha. That's one of the ones that I love to always have in the fridge. I also love to do pickled onions, just a quick pickled onion where it's just, heating up a vinegar water mixture with some salt, pouring it over some red onions with some peppercorns in there. Just the other day, I also did banana peppers, where I added a little bit of dill, I added a little bit of sugar into that as well, which I don't normally put sugar in many things, but that's one of those things. It's just a recipe that my grandma used to make, and it's just kind of a throwback for me. So that's just banana peppers sliced with some peppercorns, some dill, vinegar, water, sugar, and salt mixture, and they come out fantastic. Um, but there are also like green tomatoes, like cherry tomatoes. I love to be able to do in the summer or in the spring, early summertime. To be able to do those is one of my favorite things to be able to do. Um, you know, for tips on those, that's why I didn't want to go too far into the fermenting or doing sauerkraut without the salt. You just want to make sure that you're careful about doing them because there are things that can go wrong when you're fermenting foods. Pickling's a little bit different, but just do a little bit of research and make sure you're either following a recipe from a reputable source. There are a lot of forums out there specifically on fermenting and pickling, which I would highly recommend to be able to go check out. There are a lot of them on a platform called Reddit that are specifically around fermenting, and a lot of fun kitchen things on there as well too. And I think there are some on Facebook as well. So definitely check some of those out. But yeah, fermenting foods, great fun thing to be able to do. I've been looking at doing some tempeh as well too, and looking at other ways to be able to make fun fermented foods like misos and stuff. But all kinds of fun experiments to do in the kitchen. So happy cooking with that, Sally. All right, Beth, what is your favorite brand of chef's knives and honing tool? Um, so it's we get this question quite often about chef knives, and I think that the best answer for this is it's going to be different for everyone. What I recommend doing is going into a store that has a wide variety of different chef knives and putting them physically in your hand. See how it feels in your hand. Holding it, do a couple rocks on a cutting board or something like that as well too, if you're able to be able to see what works best for you. Now, that being said, there are also huge varieties of different kinds of prices on chef knives. So you can go anywhere from like a $20 chef knife to a $500 chef knife. And those $500 chef knives, are I wouldn't say that they're any better than a much lower priced one. They're just usually made of different materials, or they have very unique things about them. Now, in my own knife block at home, I pretty much have it all filled with Wusthof knives. So I have a couple Wusthof classic chef knives that I put in there as well. I have uh, like a Wusthof, what is it, the vegetable chef knife, which has the holes in it so things fall off of it as well too. But on when I'm cooking professionally and I'm out either catering on something like that, I use Shun chef knives. Now, that's what's the difference kind of in those. The shun that I use is actually called a Ken Onion, which is discontinued now. But one of the things I love about it is on the top of the blade. So if you're holding the blade like this, on the very top of it, when you wrap your fingers around, there's a little thing right here that protects your finger from getting your chef callus on it, which is wonderful. I love that. And so when I'm doing catering gigs and stuff like that, I'm chopping hundreds of onions. If I'm using like a Wusthof classic, I'm getting that kind of blister on the inside of my finger, no matter how long I've been cooking. That always happens on the Wusthof classics. Um, but on some other varieties, I think it's Mercer also makes another one like that that has that little kind of bump on on the top of it, which you can wrap your finger around and it protects your finger, which I love that aspect of that Shun Ken Onion. I think it's an 8-inch chef knife. You can still find those out there, but they're really, really expensive now because they've been discontinued for like 5 years. But true answer is kind of Wusthof is kind of the one that I have at home most of the time. But I do use a wide variety of different knives from from the Mercer brands, from the Icons, all kinds of other knife brands out there. But really, the best advice I have for you is to see what feels best in your hand, and always keep it sharp using the honing tool, which is the second part of this question. On a honing tool, I don't have a specific brand I like. What I do is I usually go to a restaurant supply store and I look for a diamond tipped honing tool. And I usually don't like the round ones as much. I usually like the ones that are a little oblong, because you can get a better feel of where you're at on it. So you see a lot of chefs, when they're honing their knife and they're like going back and forth like this, which is something I personally do as well. But because my honing tool is a little oblong, it's easier for me to feel my knife, and when I'm going back and forth on that, to be able to find the angle that I'm looking for on that. So I actually love that. So two things is, one, look for an oblong one, and the second thing is look for diamond tipped, because it actually keeps sharper longer. Because being a chef is, or a cook as long as I have, it's honing tools wear out, so you can wear out the end of them. So gone through many, many of them. So I think a diamond tipped, and I love the oblong ones. And no brand specific at all on those. If you get those two things, you're going to be pretty set. All right, Alicia, what do you consider the correct length of time to have the beef bone for soup to avoid overcooking? Thank you. I'm not 100% sure how to answer that one, because I don't cook beef. So the correct length of time to have the beef bone for soup to avoid overcooking. Sorry, Alicia, I don't know how to answer that one. So we will send it to our help desk, and you'll hear back from somebody to answer that question for you. All right. So back to the sauerkraut question for Terry. Can you pickle the cabbage instead of fermenting it? If yes, how would you do it? Yes, you totally can pickle the sauerkraut at the same time. So I usually will also use that same kind of blend of that, but you could do a hot vinegar over the top of that cabbage, and you can do the same kind of ingredients you're doing in your sauerkraut if you'd like to. It is going to taste a little bit different, because part of what makes it, the salt helps that kind of sauerkraut break down. Now, one thing that you can do on this, if you're really trying to avoid the salt, is you can salt your cabbage beforehand and then rinse it off. It's a very common thing to do with kimchi. Usually, when I'm making kimchi, I will heavily salt my cabbage. And then afterward, I'll, rinse it off, because what you're doing is breaking down the cellular walls of that cabbage. So you're getting that, the consistency and texture you're looking for, but I don't want all the salt in it as well. Now, some people would say you're not supposed to rinse it off, just brush it off. I usually just don't want all that salt, so I'll wash it off at the same time. Now, if you want to pickle it, you can do a quick pickle, just using your vinegar water mix as well, without the sugar or the salt in that. But the flavor and texture will turn out a little bit different. Just do a little bit experimentation with that. If you want to do your caraway seeds or your apple or something in that, it'll actually all work in the same way. But your salts is part of that process, typically, on making that sauerkraut. All right, so Kimberly, hello, Chef Dan. When making tempeh for the first time, which I plan on trying later today, any suggestions? I'm planning on steaming, then frying it on the griddle. Not sure why I'm afraid of it. So making it, meaning you're not making the tempeh, you're cooking the tempeh after it's okay. So yeah, one of the first things I always tell people to do is, for tempeh, I love to actually put it in a water and boil it. And this is actually just something that I've done for years. When I first when I first started cooking tempeh, I didn't really do it as much, and it always had this kind of interesting kind of well, it's like a fermentation flavor to it, but there was something a little off that I didn't really like much on it. And chef gave me a tip of putting it in water and boiling it for about 5 minutes, and then taking it out. And it's amazing the difference on that. So do that first, and then prepare it however you're going to prepare it. So that's one of the first things I do, is just in the whole block, is I'll take water, boil it for about 5 minutes, a little bit. You don't want it to start crumbling apart. Um, and then after you have that, you can definitely steam it, which is great to be able to have it to kind of heat up. Now, if you're going to fry it, just slice it, thin, to be able to make that happen. Now, if you're going to use oil, that's great. Just make sure that like, because if you're boiling it and then if you're going to steam it, you don't want to steam it too long because it can start to fall apart, especially if you're going to be frying it and flipping it like that on the griddle. So just watch how long you're going to steam it beforehand. A lot of people say if you steam it, you can skip the process of boiling. I just find that it works a lot better if I actually boil it to be able to get rid of that kind of off flavor as well. And then make sure to, before you start frying it, to season it beforehand. So put your seasonings on there and then get it into fry. You can add more seasoning afterward, but I love before I actually get it into the griddle. If you're going to fry it, it actually helps to absorb some of the flavors by seasoning it beforehand as well. So it should be great. Don't have any worries about that. It's an easy product to be able to use. Getting it to perfection is actually pretty easy. So the more you do it, the better you're going to get at this, Kimberly. Good luck. Happy cooking. All right, Sandra. Hello, Dan. And what in your opinion, do you think is the best chef knife for an 8-inch? So again, I'd probably go back to that same, kind of a thing, like an 8-inch chef knife. I think that there isn't a best. There's a best for you. And that really all comes down to how the knife feels in your hand. I have bigger hands, so a bigger handle worked really well for me. Also, the way I hold my knife is I'm always going to wrap my top finger over the top of the blade of it like that. So um, that's one of the things I love about that one, the Shun Ken onion knife, because it has that guard if I'm doing lots and lots of cooking. But otherwise, I'm just going to use a standard, a Wusthof classic at home. Now, the Mercer brand is really great. They've sent me a lot of fun things in those too. There are a lot of great other brands out there, and I think really it just kind of comes down to each person. And I think that the Wusthof thing just started for me when I was much younger, where I just kept adding a knife, every so often to my knife block. So now it's full, and I've got a whole knife block full of, the Wustofs, which is great. But that might not work for everybody. And experimentation with that is part of, cooking. And the more you cook, the more you're going to find other knives, and there might be specialty knives or a special maker of knives, where it's handmade. Those are all great things to experiment with. So hope that helps. Cynthia, great seeing you again. Chef Dan, would you share with us your recipe for pickled onions? We might have to wait until your next live event to see it, though. Patience is a good thing to develop. So yeah, my pickled onion recipe is actually one, I think it's actually the one that's on Ruby. I think I filmed that one. Um, and it's basically, slicing red onions very thin, and then taking just, probably like 10 peppercorns. I'm talking about using like one of the smaller jars. It's not a quart jar. It's one of the smaller kind of jelly jars. That's typically what I do with those. So I'll put in the black peppercorns, maybe like 12 of them. I'll put in a clove of garlic and smash it before putting it into the jar. And then I will do probably about, the liquid will be about half and half water versus vinegar, and then probably put about a tablespoon of salt into it, maybe a little bit less than a tablespoon. And I typically will just put the water, vinegar, and salt into a pan, bring it up to a boil. And as soon as it brings it to a boil, I'll pour it over the onions and over the black or over the onions, and then seal the top of the jar. Shake it up a little bit to make sure that the peppercorns and everything kind of goes around. Sometimes I might add dill to that, but it's pretty rare that I would. But then shake that up and let it sit for at least probably a day, and put it in the fridge afterward as well too. But it's super simple. It's like there's no exact ingredient, amounts to them. But it works really well for me, and I use it all the time. In fact, I just made them the other day for tacos, so they're fantastic. All right. So Susan, I just started using soy curls. Any thoughts and recommendations? Soy curls are one of those things in the vegetarian world and plant-based world that have been around for a very long time, and you can use them in a huge variety of ways, along with textured vegetable protein, all the new kind of things too that are with the, like the crumbles, the, meat crumbles that are fake meat. All of those things can be used in a huge variety of different ways. So you can use them for, toppers on things. You can use them for taco meats and season them like tacos. You can, like there's a huge variety of ways. So we would, you can put them into things like I was talking about the shepherd's pie earlier. Soups, another great thing to be able to put them into as well. If you're going to do something like a soup, I would recommend seasoning them first as you're hydrating them, because usually, depending on the soy curl you're getting, you have to hydrate them first. So make sure to hydrate them, cook them off a little bit with the seasoning that you're going to add them into. But very versatile product. Lots and lots of recipes out there. Not as many people use them now as they used to, which is interesting. But it's something that's been around in the plant-based world for a very long time. Peter, Chef Dan, speaking about knives, what is the best way to store them when not in use? Magnetic bar versus block versus blade cover in a storage bag. Those are all great ways to be able to store them. So, I at home I have a knife block, and my knife block is wooden, and I store my knives in there. Now there is the contention that people will say, well, you're dulling the knife as you're putting it into the knife block, but as long as it's a wooden one, it's not going to be too much. It's like you're cutting on the cutting board. So that's typically what I use at home. But I also have probably 20 knives in that knife block. If I were to have a magnetic bar, that'd be just too many for them. Now, if I were a type of person in my kitchen, I'm just going to use 6 knives or something like that, that's great. Um, and I'd probably use something like a magnetic bar. But the block works for my use. The magnetic bar is easy because you can just kind of grab them quick, fast. Um, I guess just as fast as a block. Now, the my other blades, pretty much everything that I'm not using in a kitchen, if I'm using it for my any kind of restaurant work I do, any collaborations with any chefs, anything where I'm like, not doing it at my home, those are always, I guess, even catering stuff. All of those are stored in a bag with the cover. So that depending on the knife, a lot of times they'll come with a plastic sheath or a cover that goes over the top of those. And so I'll keep the sheath over the top of it, and then keep it rolled up in my knife bag with all the other tools in my knife bag. But everything I always put in a bag, I'm always going to have a sheath or a cover for each individual knife to be able to make sure that I'm keeping the blade as sharp as possible. And then, of course, honing them when I get to site to make sure that they're as sharp as possible. So at home, magnetic bar and a block. In an industrial kitchen, definitely a magnetic bar versus a block. The blocks are much too hard to keep clean in industrial settings. They also get in the way kind of a lot, but it's just kind of something I grew up with, and I've had the same knife block for probably 35 years. It took me a very long time to fill those all, but again, just make sure that if you're taking them anywhere, that they actually have a cover for them. And then at home, the magnetic bar versus the block totally work. Just it's a personal preference. Good question, Peter. All right, Jane, adding to the tempeh question, do you boil the water first before placing the tempeh in the water? I do, actually. I usually I might sometimes put it in at the halfway point, but I'm at least going to get the water to be hot before I put the tempeh in. It might not be like a rolling boil or anything like that. In fact, if it is a rolling boil, you might want to dial it back a little bit. The important thing is you don't want to boil the tempeh so much that it's starting to fall apart. You don't want it to crumble apart. So, but yeah, bring it to a boil, and about the 5-minute mark, and you'll see if it's starting to kind of fall apart a little bit just by taking tongs or something onto it as well. And when you bring it out, remember it's hot. You might want to tap it dry, to get some of the moisture off if you're using either seasoning as well too. Colleen, chef, what would be the first 4 knives from Wusthof a person might purchase? Okay, so I would your standard 8-inch chef knife is probably the very first one that I would get for anybody. It doesn't matter what brand, but that's typically an 8-inch chef knife is something I would go to. And after that would be a bread knife, which is great to have. Paring knife is definitely an essential. So a paring knife, and I have a couple different versions. I have like a 3-inch paring knife, and then I have a 4 to 5-inch paring knife are probably the two that I use the most. So those would probably be the first. Would be your chef knife, your bread knife, and a paring knife are probably the three essentials that you would need from anything else. All the other knives that I have in my block are some variation of that. So, the 8-inch chef knife, I have 3 versions of that in my knife block, and I have those because, I cook often enough where I'm, cleaning them and I have them on a drying rack to be able to dry them, or if somebody else is in the kitchen cooking with me, I always want to be able to have them use the same tools that I'm using. So they're always accessible like that. My paring knives, because I go through them again very quickly. I think I have like 5 of them in my knife block. And then I always have the bread knife. Oh, I guess a serrated blade would be a good one. I usually have, like a tomato knife or something like that as a serrated blade. And I usually just keep like beyond the bread knife, which is also serrated. I'll usually use just like probably it's like a 6-inch serrated blade that's on that as well. I can't remember what that one's called. But those are all great knives to be able to just essentially have in your toolkit. Most important, really, though, is your chef knife. That and a bread knife, and you can pretty much do anything you want to with those. Um, but yeah, the bread knife, chef knife, paring knife, I think are the three kind of go tos. All right. What does miso paste do for a recipe when it calls for it? Well, that depends on the recipe, Sandra. Um, Miso paste is wonderful, just as a miso soup is fantastic. I often will do a red miso paste glaze on a mushroom, which is great. Miso is a wonderful, it's a fermented soy. Typically, you can also do it out of other beans like chickpeas and stuff like that if you're trying to avoid the soy. But it is a fantastic product, adds a lot of umami for it, a real depth of flavor for things as well too. Now there are different kinds of miso out there, so I definitely want to give you fair warning on that as well. Like typically in soups, you'll find like a mellow white miso, something like that, where it's just kind of this very light flavor for something, where like a red miso is going to have a much bigger, bolder, pronounced flavor to it. They work great for glazes. You can use them in dressings to be able to add a little bit of umami to them as well too. I love putting them in dressings. Actually, I'll use the mellow white in recipes, or I'll put in like a tofu, some vinegar, maybe some a different kind of a seaweed or something like that. And make like a nice creamy but umami style dressing with those as well too. But soups, glazes, sauces, dressings, those are really where I'm going to use those miso pastes the most. And traditionally, it's going to be able to add a depth of flavor and a little bit of umami to them. Renee, are oils ever used in a whole food plant-based diet? If so, would you use oil? Would When would you use oil and what kind of oil? So, in a whole food plant-based diet, oils are typically not used as much. And there's a lot of arguments between, different sides on this because some people, when they say a whole food plant-based diet, are very, very strict on it. And if you look at what an oil is, it's basically like take olive oil for the example, right? Like how close does the product look to the original product, right? So how close does olive oil look to olives? And how many olives does it take to actually make olive oil? It's very processed to be able to get it to be at its end product. So any kind of an oil, avocado oil, canola oil, olive oil, all of those things are extremely processed to be able to get them to be the end result of this very fatty liquid. So it's 120 calories per tablespoon of any kind of oil. It doesn't matter what kind it is, without a whole lot of nutritional value to it. So because of that, most people that are following a whole food plant-based diet don't use oils. Now, I, have many, 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 many years in whole food plant-based cooking and have developed lots and lots and lots of recipes for all kinds of companies across the world using whole food plant-based diet. I personally do use oil at home. But what I'll typically do is I'll use a small amount of oil to be able to make the nonstick surface. And I used to teach this at schools all the time because I would see they'd have these huge sheet pans and they'd take the spray oil, and they'd put it on the pan and they'd just be like, go over it and just keep going and going and going. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how much of that do you really need? All you're trying to do is make a nonstick surface. So what I usually recommend to people is just to put like just a drop of oil on whatever surf it is, whatever pan it is you're using, and then take a paper towel and wipe down the outside of it. That way, you're not getting an excessive amount of oil. You're minimizing it to a very small amount, achieving the nonstick surface that you're talking about. When you're cooking with oil, especially at that very beginning stage, you're not cooking with it because you're looking for the flavor. You're typically trying to do it to be able to get the nonstick surface. There are other ways to do it without oil, which we do lots and lots of training on. But if you'd like to be able to use the oil, just try doing it that way, where you use a very small amount of oil that's on the surface to be able to make it to the nonstick surface. Now, if you're looking for oils for flavors, you typically will add those in at the end of a cooking process. Because if you're adding something like olive oil, a lot of people are like, I love the taste of olive oil, so I cook with it all the time. Well, typically, if you're cooking with olive oil, especially at the beginning, you're cooking off all the flavor of that olive oil flavor by the time you're done cooking. If you're looking and you really like the flavor of olive oil, it's something you should add at the end, because the subtle nuances of the flavor of olive oil will still be present in it if you put it on in its raw state over a cooked meal. So, um, the short answer is that no, oil is not part of a whole food plant-based diet, but it's one of those kind of contention, one of those areas where people kind of are on the fence on. Some people do use them, some people don't. I use them just out of ease to be able to make things go kind of fast, quick, and easy, which is not always the way to be able to eat a whole food plant-based diet. But I'll let you make the choice on if you want to use the oils in them. Just know that a lot of people would say absolutely not. It's not something you put in the a part of a whole food plant-based diet. All right, Ingrid, what are your favorite 5 plant dishes you can eat all your life on an island? Looking for recommendations. Well, let's see. That's a little hard, of course, but living in Texas like almost 20 years, as long as I did, I think taco would have to be on that list. And we do some form of a taco pretty much every week at my house. We definitely throw different variations on it, where sometimes it'll be, like a refried bean, taco, or sometimes it'll be like a bean mixture of pinto and black beans cooked with, peppers and onions. Just 2 days ago, I did like a style we did off of our Plant Pro class, which is just red peppers, green peppers, and then mushrooms and white onions sautéed with lemon juice or lime juice over the top with black pepper, a little bit of salt, and just that as your taco filling with some cilantro, a little sliced up radish. So good. So tacos, there's so many different varieties to be able to do on tacos. That would probably have to be one of those, because I can switch those things out all the time depending on whatever ingredients I find on an island, right? So I can be able to switch those out. Pastas are always another big fun one for me, just because I love the variety in them. Love making different kinds of pastas too. Pesto, probably one of my favorites, but also love to be able to experiment with things. I do a vegan carbonara I'll actually be making this weekend for some guests. That's a fantastic one that really impresses people at the same time, but really has that full flavor that you're kind of looking for in those too. I do like my kids love butter noodles, and I do an adult butter noodle too, where I'll add more flavors into them as well. And that's just taking a plant-based butter with a little bit of garlic powder for the kids, and for the adults, we'll add some other flavor profiles into those as well. I love to do a za'atar version of that as well too, where adding za'atar to that kind of butter noodle just adds so much flavor to it, and very unique in a different kind of a way, where you might add some, sun-dried tomatoes or something into that as well. So we've got a pasta dish, we've got tacos. There's so many. I mean, that's a pretty wide variety in there as well too. Um, you know, Probably like every morning I always do almost every morning I do a breakfast burrito as well, where I do a tofu scramble. So some sort of tofu scramble will probably be on my list for those as well. Um, you know, yeah, that's only 3, and it seems like I've covered so much already. I love to do soups too. So, that variety of soup, I always keep my scraps from doing my prep. and I will make a stock almost every week. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks. Then I'll come up with a different soup each week. So this week I made a tortilla soup, and I used trumpet mushrooms, and then use the technique where you scrape them with a fork to make them shredded. So it's almost like a shredded chicken. And then you saute those down in your soup pot with some nice white onions, and add some boro sauce with the chipotle peppers, can of diced tomato, and then do the stock into that as well. And again, with some cilantro and some sliced radish in that. Super, super good. Very spicy, depending on how much you put in there. Oh yeah, because I also put a jalapeno in it this week. Um, so soup's definitely kind of high on that list as well. And that's a thing is like you're probably asking for specific dishes, but I'm giving you just kind of wide ideas of different ways to go because those soups, like this week, like I said, I made the tortilla soup, but I think last week it was a potato leek soup, and that's super simple where it's just leeks sauteed down, and then you add in your potatoes, your stock, and then lots of pepper, into it. And just that simple thing with a little bit of almond milk in just for, the creaminess too, just super, super good. And those are just kind of, really easy, quick dishes to do. I also did a carrot ginger too, the week before that, where it's just lots of carrots, onion, and ginger. Cook it all down in your stock and then blend it up, and then you just do a drizzle of some I do like a silken tofu, with lemon juice, and blend that up, and you can do a nice decoration on the top. Super great, good for the soul, super good for you. So there's a lot of different ways to be able to go in that one. I hope that helps, Ingrid. Well, it actually brings us to the end of our live session. So thank you for joining us for Ask Me Anything Hours. I hope you learned something, and join us again soon, and happy cooking.